see you guys in the dark.
I'm honestly such a grumpy tomboy, I never imagined that I would end up with a would-be stalker. Especially not with the career that I chose. I was a forensic death investigator. Forensics police officers that generally work with the DA's office and or the medical examiner's office that looks into the cases of suspicious deaths. Occasionally I'd run into people who had a passion and interest in what I did because they'd seen CSI or Law and Order a few times. No big deal, right? Wrong. So very, very wrong. It started with a homicide scene I'd been called to at an ungodly hour in the morning when Mr. Fanboy showed up. He was around his late 30s or early 40s, average height, and modestly fit, chatting away with one of the poor UNIs guarding the scene. Not a big deal. It happens because people are curious. But when he whips out a camera and snaps a few pictures, at that point I figured it was a really nosy, tone-deaf journalist and decided to give him a polite lecture on how inappropriate it was to take pictures of a crime scene. Especially when we're getting ready to move the deceased body. I deleted the pics, sent him on his way, and figured I'd never see him ever again. But no, he pops up again a week later at another questionable scene. It doesn't click yet that something is seriously off until a week after that he shows up to another scene. This one being a complete county away from the last one. So, I worked a major city in Texas through the medical examiner's office, so we took cases from several surrounding counties. A few thousand square miles. So it was odd that this guy would show up to a rather standard scene on the outer edge of our covered area, even if he was the press. I mentioned it to some of the co-workers when I got the chance, and they've noticed him hanging around some of their scenes as well. When he showed up again, me and a uniformed officer shake him down to see who the hell he is, and why he's got a major hard-on for rubbernecking crime scenes. I'm used to rubberneckers. I get it. People are curious, and sometimes a bit morbid when something happens nearby. Once the excitement and newness wears off, they go on about their business. Mr. Fanboy doesn't have a criminal record, like not even speeding or parking tickets, so my superior had to talk with him, basically explaining that he was making everyone nervous, and it looked really shady to just hang out at a crime scene. So he disappears for a couple of weeks before switching to a new tactic. If he can't hang around the crime scenes, why not hang around the investigators? Fanboy shows up at one of my favorite dive bars that I frequent because it was near my home. Over 30 miles from where I work. Now, I'm a 5'7" woman who doesn't look imposing in the least. My coworkers used to tease that I looked like I was a kid playing dress-up in my uniform. Like most women, I tried to be polite with the guy who at the time was about 20 years my senior, but declined any offer of a drink. He doesn't take the hints and chats up with me of some of the creepiest shit I've ever heard. What's the worst crime scene you've investigated? Have you ever worked a case where the victim was dismembered? So I'm creeped the fuck out. These are things that I don't even want to talk to with a therapist, much less a dude who is giving me some seriously murdery vibes. I completely shut him down, not even trying to be polite, but he seems a little put off, but not apologetic in the least. I went home, put my service weapon back on, and called my supervisor to give them a heads up and start a paper trail for an RO. He served with a cease and desist a few days later, and I figured that the threat of an RO and trouble with the police will deter him from escalating any further. Not even 24 hours after the cease and desist is delivered, he's back to shadowing crime scenes like it's going out of style. At another female investigator's scene, he gets into an altercation with one of the uniformed officers. He gets slammed with the trespassing, obstruction, and other few charges, but since then he has no record. He's let go on bail. And then he shows up to a scene I'm working on 3 days later. We get into a scuffle after he breaks one of my guy's nose and gets into the scene. He's not as strong as he looks, but I still ended up with a black eye. He looked worse by the time my partner and I finally get him cuffed. My investigation is opened and turned into the police scanner, and a lot of creepy journalists in his car, as well as the notes on where I lived and worked, along with the info on one of my other female investigators. From what I heard through the grapevine, his mother's house, where he was living, was creepy as hell. Yeah, I never thought people would be that obsessed with crime scenes. forensics, or the likes that they'd end up going to jail over it. But here we are. I'm also very aware that they probably had a lot of very unsavory things planned for me and or one of my coworkers, which still makes my skin crawl to this day. So creepy forensic fanboy, who is also probably a Dexter wannabe who watched too much CSI and Bones, if you ever get out of prison, let's not meet again. It was the midsummer, on a Sunday, when I planned to meet one of my girlfriends in San Bernardino. This happened to be a year ago. I was 15 at the time, and dressed in a pretty provoking manner. I wore Cortez shoes, khaki dickies, big shirts, the usual Latino gang attire. No one really wanted to mess with me, especially when I'm pretty big. 200 pounds, 5'11", and I have a mean look. Bald head and a thin scar that reached down the side of my face from a fight I got into before. I also have a few amateur, self-inflicted tattoos down my forearm and hands that are pretty meaningless, but more creepy and ugly. I also know how to fight. I've been in boxing ever since I got out of the psychiatric hospital in Chino Hills. Back to the story. I took the bus to visit one of my girlfriends. I got to her house in the morning, about 11 o'clock. She complained that she texted me, but I had no messages from her. I left her house about 6 and caught the last bus home. I thought I was home free until the driver told me that the bus was out of service. The sun was beginning to go down. It was dark when the bus driver left. I pulled out my phone to call my mom. I had an unread message from my phone company saying my phone service had been disconnected because of non-payment. That's great. This is probably why the girls' texts weren't going through. I'm stuck in the middle of the most poverty-stricken counties, with no way to contact my parents or even get home. I was in front of a theater by Regal San Bernardino, 14 and RPX, and behind the Carousel Mall. A few people loitering at the bus stop rushed by and asked if I was selling dope. I walked away and was spooked by a homeless lady, throwing bottles and screaming at the top of her lungs with no apparent reason. I ran a block away, looking for a payphone, a way to call my parents. I reached a McDonald's, where I was planning on calling my parents with their free Wi-Fi. My phone died when I got there. I paid for a drink and sat down. I was so helpless. I looked around to see if I could ask somebody if I could use their phone to call my parents. There was a man sitting over at a table. I approached him and asked him if I could use his phone. He said yes. As I frantically dialed my house phone, my mom answered and said she was on her way to pick me up. This man told me to sit with him, to calm down and eat a burger with him that he ordered. When I went to refill my cup, I glanced over and saw him putting something into the burger he placed at my side. I sat down with him and told him that I wasn't hungry. He said all right, and placed it on the tray, not touching it again. He was an old man, had glasses, and was pretty fit for his age, and he was missing his pinky and index finger on his right hand, which made him eat fries really abnormally. He ate really fast, as if somebody was going to take his food away. Swallowing without even chewing, he was probably 50 years old, or maybe a little bit more. He told me he was Siberian, working for a government project. He said he gets a lot of money, and he has his white Mercedes-Benz outside. He offered me a ride home, where I declined and told him my mother was already coming. He gave me a creepy smirk, which rang chills down my spine, and the hairs on my neck stood up. I was about to flip. I wanted to beat the crap out of him. I was furious. Why was he doing this to me? I thought this only happened in movies. I'm a big guy. No one really should mess with me. Look at my tattoos. Look at my appearance. You shouldn't mess with me. I heard my mama's voice as the front door opened, and I felt calm. I got up and waved goodbye. My mom and I at a red light when I noticed the white Mercedes-Benz roll up behind my mom's car. This isn't a usual car to see in this poverty-stricken area, so I was pretty sure it was the man. I thought he was going a different direction, but once my mom got on the freeway, I knew he was following us. Each lane we crossed, he did. The exit we got out of, he did. I didn't want to alarm my mom, so I asked her if she can stop at the store so I can buy us some chips. We pulled into the parking lot. As I saw the man drive off, noticing the shine of lights off of his glasses. I wasn't being paranoid. When my mom drove me home,
I didn't notice any car trailing us. As we pulled into the driveway, I noticed the Mercedes pass by. How in the hell? I was freaking out as I noticed the shine of the light off of his glasses. Now he knew where I lived. I didn't tell my family anything. I was sure I was going to give my dad a heart attack. He wasn't in the best conditions. My mom was already stressing out about it, and my brothers were too young. I had a gun under my mattress that I used to feel tough, but I knew I needed it now more than ever. I was the black sheep in the family, so I was usually left home alone. I heard my blue-nosed pit bull barking in the front yard. I looked outside the window and noticed the man passing by, trying to secretly take pictures of my house. I saw his car pass by my house a few minutes after. This happened the next day as well. It happened a few times and then stopped. Though when I was with my homeboys after school a month later, I noticed the Mercedes parked on the opposite side of the road from where I usually exit school. It was after detention, so no one was around. I knew it was him because I could see the shine off the light of his glasses. I told my friends, since it was about 8 of us, cholo-looking teenagers. My homies joked before I even told them about this guy, saying I'm crazy and that they'll beat his ass if they see him. My homeboys immediately ran over to the car, and my friend, Doughboy, pulls out a gun from his backpack. I was frozen with adrenaline and fear. I knew he was bluffing because the gun is never loaded. It's just for show. Or was it? I debate that, to this day. Keep in mind, after this, it's a dispute between us. No cops can be involved. I can't call the cops on him anymore. What am I going to say? We pulled a gun out on him? We threatened to kill him? We can't even prove that he's stalking me. Besides, it's my word against this old man, who is rumored to work for the government. I also have a police and mental health record, so I definitely am unreliable, and I'm going back to the loony bin, or back to juvie if the cops find out. I was scared, but at the same time my heart started jumping faster and faster. It was a mixture of adrenaline and fear, because I don't want to go back to the loony bin or back to JDAC. We surrounded the car, and Doughboy signaled for the man to roll down his window. With the gun pointed at him, he put the window down. He had a smirk as Doughboy literally put the gun to his neck. He had his phone in one hand, trying to hide it, and Doughboy picked it up. It was an iPhone, set at recording from his lock screen. There was only one video. We looked at the video and it was us, walking out of school. The camera zooming in on me. The video stopped recording when we ran towards the car. Doughboy deleted the video and told the man these exact words, that I'll never forget. "You old sack of shit, you better stop creeping out my homeboy or I'll end you." "I'll do it right now," he said, cocking the trigger back. I can see this old man turn pale with fear, but I don't want to ruin your nice car. Now leave before I change my mind. I don't ever want to see you here again. Anywhere near this town. I own these streets, bitch. PIC, Doughboy 909's finest. We pulled Doughboy off the man, and he drove off. I never saw him again. It's been a year and a half that this had happened, and I never told anybody about this, except for my homies. Damn, I'm excited. Just talking about this. I still sleep with the gun under my pillow. And I have hellish nightmares about a man eating fries with 3 fingers. But I'm glad, first off. I'm glad I'm still alive because most people don't live through stuff like this. Second, I'm glad to have some erratic, gang-banging friends. Third, I'm glad I never saw that man after. Creepy, rich, stalker, Siberian old man that I met at McDonald's? Let's not meet again. For your own safety, and mine. I grew up in a small town in the middle of nowhere in eastern Washington. The town I grew up in had only 2 bars in it. A post office, a gas station, convenience store, and 2 schools. Elementary and the high school and middle school was further down the road. Since there weren't a lot of kids, the middle school and high school kids were all in the same building. Like I said, small town. This town, though, takes place in the neighboring town 15 minutes or so down the road when I was 15 years old. My best friend Nathan lived in town right in the middle of the university in some of the lower income apartments. These apartments weren't that bad for being low income. Like other places, they were nicely kept up and not too many druggies around the area, but a lot in their surroundings. I preferred hanging out in his apartment and around the university that my shabby, falling-apart trailer resided in the middle of Methsville. Nathan and I known each other since kindergarten and have been best friends since the very first day. We ended up both getting in trouble for writing on the walls, so we got put into the chairs facing the wall together, and we had gotten into trouble ever since. We went to the same school for the first couple of years after he moved up here from Alabama. Eventually, his parents divorced in 3rd grade. Him, his 2 sisters, and their mother moved out to the next town over, so we had to go to school out there. We could never just be best friends for life, so we kept in touch with phone calls, emails, and little letters telling each other about our days at school and how much we hated our teachers and stuck-up peers. Work we were proud of. We even got to hang out at each other's houses for entire weekends every weekend. I had just turned 15 in December when I had to deal with my bio mother dying of a drug overdose. Both of my parents were heavy drug users, and my father is still to this day a drug dealer. I had a lot of horror stories growing up because of this, but those are for another time. A couple months after my mother died, my father went to jail for a bit. I don't remember how long, but it was a couple of months. He was in and out of jail a lot throughout my entire life. When he came out, he was different. He was worse than before. He'd always been the devil himself to me, but somehow he had gotten even worse. Months later, right before summer started, my bio father kicked me out because I told somebody something that happened to me. Again, another story for another time. 15 and on my own, I was couch surfing for a while, around my shitty tiny town, just trying to finish out that year of school before summer hit. I felt like once summer hit, and I had been more free, I would be able to figure out what I would do about everything. This was the early days of Facebook, and not everyone had a phone in their pocket, so just like any normal kid those days, the library is where I spent most of my days. We had an hour time limit on Billy, one of my names of the computers available for public use at the library. Slow as all hell, and loud as shit, I would scroll through Facebook seeing if any of my friends were on, see if I could crash with them and their family for a couple of days. Nathan was the only one that was on, and he was also the only one that had messaged me. His mother was going to be gone for a couple of days for something or another, and his sisters were staying at their father's house. Nathan and his father were never on good terms, so he didn't go over there to visit as much as his sisters. He was going to stay home alone for almost a week, and his mother agreed on me staying with him while everybody was gone. She just wasn't able to come get me, and the people I was staying with didn't have the time or means to transport me into the next town. We agreed to walk down the trail that connects the towns, meet up in the middle, and walk back together, smoking cigarettes his mother had gotten him, and weed we had obtained. It was sunset by the time we got to the opening of the university. This town is a lot bigger than the one I normally lived in. A decent amount of abandoned buildings to explore. Lots of things to get into, and gigantic universities to explore day and night. It was like heaven for a rebellious teenager. There was also some areas from the patches of woods. It was summer, so a lot of the college kids had gone home for the summer. Not a lot of people to bother you, and the students that stayed over the summer didn't want to be bothered and didn't want trouble, so we got away with a lot. Complete and total freedom. It was about middle of June and getting pretty hot outside. Nathan and I were out almost every day and night of that week longboarding around town and the university, smoking pot in every alleyway and hidey hole we could find. We went to one of his friend's house downtown to get even more stoned and smashed in a small get-together in her very large falling-apart house. Now, other than his friend Anne, Nathan and I didn't know anyone else there. Once we walked in through the front gate, I felt like something was a little off, like someone's eyes were boring into my soul. When I looked around at the other faces around me, I didn't see anyone other than Anne looking in our direction. She greeted Nathan with a hug and glanced at me, probably trying to figure out who I was in her very hammered state of mind. Then as she swayed as she led us through the small crowd of people into her kitchen and grabbed us cups and started filling them with her own terrifying concoction of booze. She had a talent for making drinks. It could be 90% alcohol, and you wouldn't even taste it. You wouldn't even know you were drinking booze until you've already chugged half of it through her signature smoothie straw and started searching for something behind you to lean against. We listened to all the good old dubstep and EDM of that time. Everyone drunk as hell, tripping balls off Molly and shrooms, smoking more than my little heathen heart could handle, and doing glove tricks. Shuffling with half-naked girls dancing around with hula hoops. You know, normal middle-of-the-week night for kids like us over the summer at that time. After 3 of Anne's drinks, I could barely remember my name, let alone the eerie being watched feeling I had felt when I first arrived. Nathan hadn't drank as much as me, but he was pretty shit-faced himself. At about 1 in the morning, everyone started to leave the party. Nathan and I had our fill of booze and decided it would be a better idea if we walked home instead of attempt to ride on our boards back to his place. We ended up not even being able to find them in the dark with our double vision. Anne showed us out of her back gate, and we started our long trek back. About halfway through the college, we were passing the science building when I heard an extra set of footsteps in a pretty dark area of the building. I clung onto Nathan's arm like drunk girls do, and whispered into his ear that I thought we were being followed. Nathan didn't flinch or even talk above a whisper, but he tried to convince me that it was just the echo of our footsteps against the building, or a drunk college student making their way home. But I realized that I felt the same being watched feeling that I had gotten when we had first gotten to Anne's. We got to the market, that's only a few blocks, about maybe half a mile from his house, and stopped to smoke a bowl and hang out outside after hours to feel like the cool kids at our spots posted out front of the store like a sad parody of Jay and Silent Bob. We drunkenly and very stoned started to freestyle. Nathan was good and still is, but I was just a dumb, edgy teenager that thought I was good. Again, I forgot about the feeling while walking here, and I threw out there that we should go through a short stroll through the graveyard and down the hill, through the park that was right next to his apartments. He thought it was an amazing idea, and we took off laughing like idiots, singing along to Insane Clown Posse, playing his iPod. When we got to the graveyard, it was really quiet. Almost unnaturally quiet, even with Nathan's iPod still playing dully in the background. The moon was bright and high up in the sky, and the stars were beautiful and shining through the sky like diamonds. It just seemed darker than it should be for the kind of night. We were drunk and creeped out, so we wanted to get the hell out of Dodge, and fast. I smelt something weird in the air, and it just felt like my body was trying to tell me something was there. Something dangerous, even though I couldn't see it. I made Nathan stop and shut his music off. We were drunk and creeped out, so we wanted to get the hell out of Dodge, and fast. I felt something weird in the air, and it just felt like my body was trying to tell me something was there. Something dangerous, even though I couldn't see it. I made Nathan stop and shut his music off. "Do you feel that?" I asked him, not even knowing what it was that I felt, let alone how to explain what I felt if he decided to ask what I meant. To my surprise, though, he just sighed and said, "Yeah." Something doesn't seem right, but I think it's just paranoia because of how much we have drank and smoked. I tried to convince myself that it was just that, and I could see Nathan trying to force himself to believe it as well. But I could tell by the way he looked on his face that he believed just as much as I did. "Let's just hurry up and get down the damn hill," I said, regretting having the idea to go through the graveyard in the first place. We picked up the pace the best we could, being 2 shit-faced drunk 15-year-olds terrified as hell, stumbling through the dark graveyard. When we got down the hill, Nathan pulled out a smoke and lit it up as we walked. "Hey bud, you got an extra one of those? And a light I could bum from you?" A raspy, smoke-stained male voice said from a park bench just out of eyesight. I just about shit myself when he spoke. Yeah. "Here," Nathan said, holding his hand out to the man that had walked towards us closer into the light from the street lamp further down the path. He had bad scabs and pick marks all over his face and neck. He was shaking just about as bad as me, but his wasn't because of fear. He was 100% tweaking out of his fullest extent while he stood there with us asking all kinds of weird questions. Not like really personal questions, but questions like how long have we been going to school here? And have either of you been burned on the arm by a cigarette? The last question freaked me out, and there were many others he asked that sent chills up my spine. I kept my mouth shut, but every time we tried to walk off, Tweaker Guy would put his arms out and try to change the subject. Living between these two towns my entire life, and because of my druggy parents, I am very used to tweakers and shady people of all sort. So of course we knew one of the biggest golden rules of Tweaker Town: do your best not to do something to piss them off, and just wait until something else gains their attention. Nathan was getting irritated by this guy and his nonsense, and their smokes were almost gone, so he just wanted to leave and get back to his house fast. So did I. Nathan tried to let the guy know nicely that we needed to hurry up and get back home. That's when the Tweaker Guy did the most unexpected thing. He spoke in the most demonic voice I could have ever imagined, as a large grotesque smile spread across his face.
"You're never leaving here," he said.
Then started opening his mouth slowly, like how Pennywise does in the original It when Eddie met him in the shower drain. After he said that, it was like his whole body just went rigid. He just froze up and went silent with his mouth open so far it looked like his jaw was going to snap. Nathan walked up a little closer to him and asked him if he was alright, and if he had a phone on him. If there was anyone he wanted us to call because we thought he was really messed up. He put his head back down, but his mouth was still agape, like it was being pulled apart. His eyes darted to him, and then to me before his head just started shaking uncontrollably. Not like going around in circles like in The Exorcist, but just like shaking around, violently back and forth. Nathan grabbed me by the arm and jerked me back towards him. I hadn't even noticed I was frozen in place, just staring at the man. Nothing but sheer terror flowing through my veins. After he tugged my arm, and I snapped back to reality, I just turned my body and booked it. I didn't even look back to see if the thing was following us or how far back Nathan was from me. I just ran as fast as my body would let me, and ran right past the entrance to Nathan's apartment. Nathan had noticed I run past his place and just started screaming at me in the loudest, shrilling voice I didn't even think he could produce from his body. Almost 6 feet, 15-year-old boy. I didn't stop to listen to him. The only thing I could think of doing was running. Like only my legs had control, and there wasn't any way in hell I was stopping. Just remember shouting back, "No!" and continued to run for my life. He eventually caught up to me and had to tackle me to the ground 4 blocks away from his apartment. He didn't know if we were being followed, but he did hear footsteps following us when we booked it out of the park, so we had to hurry and book back up the street to his apartment. We got back to his place, bolted and chained the door, shut the blinds and made sure all the lights were off, and just listened. We sat in complete silence for about 10 minutes before we heard steps and a weird flooding sound coming from outside the window we were sitting under in the dark, like the sound of a moth hitting the inside of a lampshade. Nathan got up onto his knees and peeked out the front window. His face went completely white, and he just slunk back down. I didn't have to ask. I knew the thing from the park was out there. I wanted to see it for myself again, so I scooted past him and peeked out of the blinds. The thing was just standing there. The sound we were hearing was coming from the thing in the front yard, his head moving back and forth unbelievably and unnaturally fast. I hit the blinds when I brought my hand up to my mouth in shock, and his head just snapped in my direction. We locked eyes, and he aggressively started walking towards the window, total insanity painted across his face. I ducked down and informed Nathan he was coming to the window, and quick. I didn't know what to do. I was so scared. I started sobbing and hyperventilating. Nathan was just as terrified as I was, but he always made sure to make me feel safe and to take care of me in a way. He put his arm around my neck and pulled my head into his chest. Hugging me, he started to rock gently back and forth as the thing outside started pounding against the door we were now sitting across from. He was hitting it so hard, I'm surprised the glass didn't shatter almost instantly. At some point in time, during the early morning before the sun started to come up, we had fallen asleep during a time, and the thing stopped pounding in the door. We woke up around 1 that afternoon, and Nathan looked out the peephole. There was nothing out there, and kids were playing out there, bikes and scooters outside, so he assumed it was safe to open the door. He slowly opened it and noticed something sitting on the step. He knelt down and picked it up. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like everything was going in slow motion. He shut the door and slowly turned around, showing me what was sitting in the middle of his palm. His lighter he had lent to the tweaker guy earlier that night. Home sweet home, only place you can find demon tweakers. We discussed it and think he was either tweaking out and thought he was possessed, or really was, because that shit was one of the most demonic things I have ever witnessed. I say almost because after my mother died, I lived with my bio dad and grandparents. I got into a really dark place and used to mess around with Ouija boards to try to contact my mom, and oh boy, now that's another story for another time.
This took place a couple years ago when I was still dating my ex. Him and his dad had adopted a Rottweiler, German Shepherd kind of mix from a shelter. The dog was really aggressive towards strangers and other animals. It took a couple of months for him to warm up to me, but eventually we bonded, and I would occasionally be cuddled up to on the couch with him and take a nap. It got to the point where he would push people aside to all 85 pounds of him would be with me on the couch instead of someone else sitting next to me. During the summer, my ex and me were house sitting for his dad, who was on vacation with his girlfriend. My ex would occasionally be home to walk the dog, but this time he was at work and I had to walk the dog. We had ordered a special harness beforehand, hoping it would make him pull on his leash less. My ex and his dad didn't live in the safest of neighborhoods, and it was getting dark out while I went into the woods to go for our walk. I let the dog run around by himself, but kept his harness on. Since he was very aggressive towards other people and other dogs, I'd like to keep it on so I could call him as soon as I saw someone else and get him on his leash again. For this reason, I was also kind of on edge and looking around me at all times. We weren't walking for too long when I saw a group of guys coming up in front of me. They had their hoods on and kept their heads low while clearly whispering to each other and nodding their heads towards me. I looked behind me, and another group of guys was approaching me from that side. I quickly realized it was dark out. I was a 16-year-old girl walking by myself in the woods. The dog was running off somewhere and couldn't be seen in the dark, and I had his leash in my pocket. The guys hadn't noticed I had him with me. I quickly called him to my side, and I heard his paws loudly coming towards me while he was growling. He pushed himself up against my leg and loudly started growling at the guys. I told them to just keep walking, or I would command the dog to attack. Luckily, the guys quickly walked into another direction, and I took the fastest route home again. It took me a while of cuddling on the couch to calm down again, but I'm so grateful the dog listened to this well, was very protective of me, and noticed me being scared. My ex and me broke up years ago, and I have no idea if the Savior is still well, but doggo, thank you for protecting me that day. Last year, right around Halloween, I was late to show up at a friend's Halloween party. I had a supper to go to right before, completely across town. When I left, it was around 10 p.m., and I had an hour drive ahead of me. But if I took a shortcut into a not-so-safe part of town, I would save 25 minutes. Big mistake on my part. As I'm waiting at a red light in the sketchiest part of town, I look over to the sidewalk, and I see 3 men, dressed up as the Purge, heading towards my vehicle. I look around me, and I see that there are no other cars, nor pedestrians around. These guys start coming over to me faster now, all of them carrying weapons. One had a baseball bat, one had a crowbar, and one had an axe. Whether they were just playing a Halloween prank or not, it was still the scariest experience of my life, especially because right before the light turned green, they approached my window, and one of them even tried pulling on my passenger side handle before I peeled away. Prank or not, guys from the Purge let's not meet ever again. I'm just going to preface this by saying that I was the creepy party involved. I was in a small forest nearby my house one night at around 1 a.m. on a winter night. The reason for this was because I was practicing meditation, and I sometimes like to go out into nature during sessions. I sat under a tree and just calmly melted into the environment. I managed to get into a pretty deep state, so everything was sort of dreamlike. About halfway into it, these two young women came in. They were getting drunk or high and were giggling and tipsy. They sat down about 20 feet from me, facing away, chatting, totally unaware of my presence. Then one of them noticed me and freaked out. "Whoa, what is that? Did you see that?" she said to her friend. Then the other one noticed me and shrieked. My response was, in a monotonous drone, "Don't worry, I am a human woman." I was in a particularly deep state at the time, so I didn't really think much about it. One of them responded, kind of stuttering, and asked what I was doing. I explained that I was meditating, and that they didn't need to worry about me, and that they could proceed with drinking. Needless to say, they laughed it off nervously, and then quickly made an excuse to leave.
I had always been a bit of a tomboy, and never dated boys in high school. I wasn't interested in dating, and I was oblivious when guys showed interest in me. That's why I didn't find it at all weird when I got friended on MySpace by a friend I used to know by the name of James. James went to my elementary school until about 4th grade. When we moved just one town over, back in the 90s, there wasn't many ways for kids that young to keep in touch with each other. So no one really had heard from him until the beginning of the story. I see his request, and I automatically accept it. I wasn't one of those teenagers who just accepted every friend request I got. I knew this kid, so shortly after reuniting on MySpace, we reminisced about random kid memories from where we were in the same class. You know, normal stuff that kids would talk about. Somehow we exchanged our phone numbers. Texting was relatively new back then, so unlimited plans were just becoming mainstream. We would text each other again about random memories and what we were doing that day. One thing that sticks to my mind is that we talked about buying Gyarados, which are sodas without a twist top cap. Every once in a while during our texting conversations, James would add something cheesy into the mix, like, "You just remember, you're beautiful," or some weird, cheap, corny joke like that. I brushed them off or ignored them, and just continued the conversations. If he was interested, I just was going to pretend I didn't know about it. But here's where I feel like I broke out of my character. James and I eventually talked about just meeting up to chill and hang out. He wanted to go to this really grungy carnival right near our town, about 20 minutes away from me, and I was like, sure, why not? I had only had my license for just a few months, and I was always down to get away from my secluded country house. I met up with James and his friends at the carnival. We walk around the grounds a bit, and I meet everybody. His friends were awkward, yet nice. They all wanted to go get Wendy's, so we get in one kid's big old Cadillac and just drive off. As soon as we start driving, I feel uneasy. This kid, whose name escapes me, was driving all over the road, hitting curbs, and yelling at all the other drivers. And I spoke up to him. I told him he should probably treat his grandpa's car a little bit better. He replied with something careless, so I just dropped it. When we got to Wendy's, which was within walking distance of James's house, I told him I wasn't getting back in that Cadillac. James obliged, so we walked to his mom's house, borrowed their car, and then he dropped me off at my truck at the carnival. When we parted ways, he moved closer to me, from the passenger side of the car, for a weird hug. On my way home, I got a text from James that said, Truck hugs are awkward and weird. In my head, I'm like, no crap, dude. But I replied with something like, then maybe we shouldn't do that anymore. For some reason, a week or two had passed. I agreed to hang out with him again, by his request, and his request only. He wanted to go walk the canal in his town, so I figured that it sounded like fun. He tried to take my hand, and I took it away. We walked the canal and talked about stuff, and he asks if I wanted to go to the golf course to explore some stuff. Now at this point it's getting pretty dark, but again, I thought it sounded like fun. So I offered to drive him. I do like being in control. It's how I feel the safest. We stopped at the tennis courts, and from his wallet he brings a piece of notebook paper ripped into a rectangle that read, "Good for one free back rub." I thought it was kind of funny. So I scratched his back quickly, and we left. Like I said, it was getting dark. We get to the golf course, and James grabs my hand to hold on to it again. I'm really not into him like that, but I let it happen anyways. As darkness closes the golf course, we wander the grounds, which is probably not okay, and James keeps trying to wrap his arms around me. I pulled away for the first few times, but yet he continued. He pulls me from the edge of the grounds and into the road as a car is coming, and tries to make out with me in the street. I pull him away, disgusted at the metallic taste left behind his sharp braces. I say I'm ready to go, yet he pulls me towards him again. Stands there holding me in the road, kissing me against my will, as a blazer blares its horn at us, blinding me in its headlights. Okay, seriously, it's time to go, I told him. I took him home, and I felt funny. When I dropped him off, he kissed me again. That one was okay, I guess. I think back then I was in the mindset that you have to do what the boys want. For some reason, I wish I didn't. The third and final time I agreed to hang out with James, he came to my house to show me his new huge truck that he had bought. Since he got his cool new job at the factory, and could afford it at about 17. We sat on the couch watching Family Guy with my 13-year-old brother popping out from upstairs to be annoying every hour or so. Eventually, James thought it would be cool to snuggle up to me. He got kind of pushy and started sticking his hands in my shirt, saying, "I like these." And I replied, "Everyone makes fun of me saying they're small." I don't know why I didn't push him off, and he proceeded to try to kiss me. Tongue kissing me. Just awkwardly trying to push and aggressively make me kiss him, and it wasn't what I wanted. He stuck his hand in my shorts, and it kind of hurt. I told him to stop, and I told him it was time for him to go. He tried to protest, but I made up some excuse that my brother was around, and it wasn't okay to do that in the living room. The next day he started texting me again, asking if I liked last night, and I told him he needed to keep his hands to himself next time. He replies with, "I can't tame them, but maybe you can." And I ignored him. Here's where this gets real out of hand. At this point, I didn't want anything to do with James. He was pushy and didn't respect my boundaries, and he clearly wanted to date me, or something else, because the weird corny texts never stop. Never once did he just say, "Hey, I like you." But the creepiest of all corny was after a couple of days of not speaking. I get a text from James while I was on my way to work. "Knock knock," he said. And I hesitated, but I wrote, "Who's there?" from the parking lot of my job. I was a cashier at our small grocery store, and there was a strict no phone policy at our register. So my phone stayed in the break room at all times. 3 hours later on my break, I'm reading my texts, and James has replied, "Aardvark." I feel really uncomfortable at this, and I say, "Aardvark who?" "Aardvark a million miles for you." This is where I just got mean to him. I said, "You wouldn't, and you shouldn't." And there's some other stuff about leaving me alone. He replies, "I'll prove it to you. Let me come over tonight." I lied and said, "I can't. I have to watch my brother and sister tonight." James begs me, "Please, I just want to prove it to you. I'll walk the whole way." Remember, his house is about 20 minutes by car from me, on mostly isolated roads bordered by farmland. But again, I tell him no, I'm not allowed to have anyone over tonight. I thought it was done. I get out of work at 9:15, grab my phone, and there's a text from James. It's kind of creepy walking on a road in the dark, and I flipped. "You are not walking to my house right now. I told you I'm not allowed to have anyone over. Turn around right now and walk back home." I drive home, and I feel okay. My brother is on the couch watching TV. My brother is a champion hunter, and was brought up by my father to love and respect guns. He had his bow and a shotgun in his room. Even though he was 13 or 14 at the time, it just made me feel a whole lot better. I don't get another text until midnight. I'm on the road about 2 minutes away. I tell him to turn around and to go back to his grandma's house. I tell him he better not come over to my house or I will call the cops. I am frozen in my chair. Our living room has a large window, and curtains are usually open because we have no neighbors. Even then, the curtains are translucent. They don't really do anything. I'm too frozen by shock and fear, and I don't even know to close them anyway. I look over at my brother, who's fast asleep on the couch across from the room. I'm too frozen to wake him up. On the enclosed porch, my big dogs Jenny and Tanner slept. I called my mom, my dad, and my family friend who is a tough lady, and like my second mom in many ways. My parents were sleeping, and our family friend was out at a bar and couldn't hear her phone. So I sat there frozen on the couch, TBS channel muted on my TV, and waiting. I don't know why I didn't call the cops. I think it was because James's cousin was my sister's best friend, and I didn't want rumors to start. James texts me telling me, "I'm on your road." I freak out again, and tell him not to come up my driveway, that I will call the cops. I have to mention that he wasn't physically threatening, just creepy and invasive. I just wanted him gone. I didn't want him around to look at me or know about me. And then nothing for about 3 hours. James texts me, "I'm at my grandmother's," and then I ask him if he's okay. And he went into a tirade of insults and criticism. "You don't have to be a bitch. I was going to ask you to be my girlfriend. I've never done any of that. I just wanted to see you in person and thought we could talk. You're a cunt. You made me walk all that way." And I replied with the obvious, like me politely and directly telling him not to come repeatedly. I wasn't supposed to have anyone over anyways. He had a vehicle. Then as a test to see if he came down the driveway, I asked him if he woke the dogs up. He said Tanner stayed asleep, and Jenny wasn't there, which was true. I did get up to ask Jenny to come sit with me. The part that bothered me the most was that I was very clear the whole time that I did not want him over here. Still terrified at 4 or 5 o'clock a.m., I finally feel like I can go to my room. I barely sleep, and at 6 a.m. my family friend, who comes over with her girlfriend. I come out because I hear the dogs barking and squeaking in excitement. I sat on the porch as they unload their overnight bags, and I see 2 objects on the front doorsteps. That notebook paper coupon, and a brand new bottle opener keychain. My dogs never heard him, and they never barked. I heard from him a couple times after that, and I pretended to be a teenager who couldn't spell the name Sarah, hoping he would think I changed my number. So James, the pushy creep I once attended 3rd grade with, I really hope we don't ever meet again.
I started working on a rose farm about 4 years ago. My brother turned me on to an opening, and my Aunt Lily and I were hired on the spot given our different backgrounds in horticulture. It was harder work than I had anticipated, as we not only had to tend to the roses in the greenhouses, but also had to deal with the monster plants out in the huge garden. There was no air conditioning, and when the temperatures climbed in the summer months, we found shade wherever possible. There were plenty of trees and storage buildings, and some climbing roses had grown so dense that during the breaks we would just sometimes chill underneath the long pathways that they had grown over. We set our own hours, and our boss, a terrible dragon lady of a woman, was blessedly rarely there to breathe down our necks. My brother was fired after being accused of breaking into her house, but my aunt and I stayed until family obligations kept her home more often than not. There was a revolving door of workers who came and went, usually due to how unpleasant our boss was, but the one constant was Tommy. Tommy was an older man who was nice enough, if not a bit off. He had worked there for about 9 years at that point. Towards the end of the first year, he and I were the only ones working the farm, and he seemed pretty harmless, if not a bit off-putting. Our conversations during our break were innocent. I learned that he had moved from West Virginia some years earlier with his elderly mother, but he never told me why his family up there never talked to him, and I never really asked. I'm a private person, and I figured it wasn't my business to ask him anything. But as time went by, things began steering straight into Creepy Town. Tommy would ask about my boyfriend, ask weird shit like if we ever kissed, if we shared a bed together, if we were getting married. Each time I had told him that I didn't think about those things, and didn't think that they were appropriate to ask a coworker, and it seemed like that was that. Now Tommy had always had a bit of a staring problem. I thought it was due to bad socialization, but it was really freaking weird. The staring became worse. Somehow, when he started working on the opposite side of the property, sometimes I would catch him crouched beneath a large bush or beneath a tree, just watching me work. If I saw him beneath a shade tree or beneath the climbers, I would go and sit in my car and have my break there. Tommy was also incredibly quiet when he moved. Sometimes I would stand up to find him right behind me. I have horribly bad anxiety, and this did not bode well with me. It got so bad that I told him straight up to stop, or I would clock him. I asked Boss Dragon about him one day during one of our upswings, but she confided in me that while we had been working there for years, she didn't know very much about him. She assured me, however, that he wouldn't harm a fly. Boss Dragon had a pendant for lying her ass off, though. That first summer turned to fall, and when winter hit, the job ended. I started back the next year, happy to be working outside again. I had almost completely forgotten about Tommy, but there he was, working away. I spoke to him as little as possible, and when we had a new hire there, I always made sure to stick around them even if their stay was only temporary. During Lily's sporadic work days, I would stay glued to her hip, but there were still days, too many, where I was alone with Tommy. One day, while weeding around a rose bush, I stepped into a nest of yellow jackets. I went straight to Boss Dragon's house where her ex-husband, Steve, a dearly sweet man who I now consider one of my best friends, gave me a Benadryl, watched me to make sure I wasn't allergic with EpiPens in hand, and offered me a place to sleep it off in their guest room. When I decided to go home, Boss Dragon had Tommy follow me in the work truck in case something happened. I wish I had put my foot down and said no. But if you've ever angered a bunch of yellow jackets, you know how much their stings really hurt. I wanted to get home before the Benadryl kicked in and made me go to sleep. I didn't realize that Tommy had the perfect opportunity to know where I lived. How he learned about it where my aunt lived, however, is still a mystery. Now, I visited Lily a lot since she lived maybe about 5 minutes away from me. Next to her was a public park where people always were coming and going. One day I got a call saying that Tommy had been standing on the path that led into the park, and when she asked me what he was doing, he told her that he knew I visited often, and he hoped that he would see me. My aunt is a bit of a badass, and told him to stop being creepy, and to just go away. It was public property, however, and Tommy could do whatever he wanted. What made it extra creepy is that Tommy didn't drive, so he had ridden his bike from his trailer near the Rose Farm nearly 20 miles to the park next to Lily's house. I told Boss Dragon, and she shrugged it off, but revealed to me that he often rode into town, and had been in my subdevelopment because he had told her that one day I wasn't at home. He said I was always either at home or at my aunt's house. It slowly dawned on me what was happening. He was stalking me. Boss Dragon said she would handle it. He even gave me a hug. She didn't do anything, though, and I will never forgive her for that. Very little scares me. I'm a tomboy who grew up in the country. Tommy, though, smallish and in his 50s, really scared me. I would see him in town or at the intersection by my housing development, just standing and staring as if he were waiting for something. I quit my job soon after and thought that was that. I grew really, really paranoid. I would sit on my front stoop with a baseball bat for hours on end, just waiting for him to come up, but he never did. He did most of his stalking when he knew I wouldn't see him. He was very sneaky at that. That scared me the most. Soon after I quit, one of my wheels came loose from my car, and I'm lucky that I work excellent in a crisis, because if I had not pulled over, the tire would have liberated itself from my back bumper where it was stuck, and I don't even want to know what would happen next. He continued stalking the park, continued stalking my neighborhood. I gave my neighbors a heads up. Lily grew increasingly tired of coming out in her yard only to see him standing in the park's path, staring with a cigarette perched between his lips, just waiting. Driving past the Rose Farm one day, she saw Tommy standing by an old farm truck. Lily stopped, threw her car into reverse, and swerved into the parking lot. She got out of her car and started asking him questions, which he would just not answer at all. She became so mad, my little spitfire of an aunt, that she kicked the side of the truck hard enough to dent it to keep him from kicking him. That was enough to get him to answer her next question. She asked him if she really believed he and I were in a relationship. He said yes. I had never done anything to lead this man on. Against her better judgment, she threatened him. But honestly, I love her for that. It bought me a few weeks of peace at least. I returned to the Rose Farm with my aunt and boyfriend to get our things eventually. Coolers and tools that we used because Boss Dragon was too cheap to buy the tools required for the job. Tommy was walking along the road, staring, and when my aunt told him to keep walking, he crossed the street and crouched down in the trees and just kept staring and smoking his cigarette. Lily called the cops. The officer came. A super nice young man, and his presence sent Tommy off through the woods. I told him what he was up to, and he told me that if he tried anything to get a restraining order. Then he went to speak with Tommy at his trailer. After that, phone calls began. I don't know how he got my number. At first I would tell him to fuck off, and he would say creepy shit like, how? He would never hurt me. So I started to ignore him. He texted me things about how much he loved me. Grew irate when I didn't answer. He even told me to erase the text from my phone. He wouldn't stop, and ignoring him just seemed to push him further. He kept it up until I blocked him, but he continued his daily rides into town and to the park by my aunt's house. We're also pretty sure that he loosened the lug nuts on my car. So was the cop that we talked to, and the judge, but without evidence, there was nothing we could do. That was the last straw for my boyfriend, Tim. Tim, a very sweet and level-headed man, confronted him next. The car had barely stopped when he jumped out of it and asked him what his deal was. Again, Tommy was asked if he thought I was his girlfriend. Again, he said yes, even after I made it extremely clear that I wasn't. That was the confrontation that caused Tommy to drop his simpering idiot act. It's hard to describe. I was sitting in the car with my aunt, and it was like the man had shark's eyes. I went to the courthouse as soon as I could, and was terrified that he wouldn't believe me. Despite the facts and witness testimonies, I filled out the appropriate forms and then went to speak in front of the judge. I watched other people go up, give their stories, and quite a few were sent home empty-handed. The judge was cold as ice, and I was terrified. I pride myself on keeping my exposure, but when I went up there and began speaking, I just burst into tears. I didn't feel safe in my own home. I didn't feel safe in my own town. He was so quiet when he moved, you see, that I never heard him sneaking up behind me. My sleep was plagued with nightmares where he bashed my brains in with a brick paver from the garden. To my surprise, the judge's demeanor changed. He issued an emergency restraining order, then and there, and told me to come back the next week for a more permanent one. He didn't even ask to see the text. Tommy never even showed up to defend himself either. He wasn't allowed anywhere near me, and the cops checked on me from time to time, which was extremely nice and comforting. I grew comfortable again, but it took a long time. Summer came again, and Boss Dragon called to ask if I could work again. The thing was, she wouldn't fire Tommy. When she eventually fired him, I still said no thanks, told her to eat a bag of dicks, and later learned that she had pulled the same shit on an employee years before she had been doing nothing. When Boss Dragon eventually abandoned him, my aunt, boyfriend, and I grew close to her ex-husband. And he told us that his wife had never even told him about what was going on. Since the Rose Farm was her baby, and he was a doctor with insane hours, Steve had no real way of knowing. We didn't talk to him, rarely saw him. When we worked there, he was absolutely mortified and apologetic. With Tommy gone, we worked for her ex-husband for a year to help him close the Rose Farm down. I also found out that Tommy had gotten into trouble in West Virginia for assault, and that was why he had moved down here. So here's to you, Tommy, you fucking creep. Let us never, ever meet again. A few years ago, I was going grocery shopping at a shopping center I used to frequent pretty often. That happened to be at a high school. So I was walking down the sidewalk during the middle of the day, and all of a sudden this shadow figure appears super close to me and continues for a while. Like something you'd see right before you get stabbed in the back by a serial killer. So I'm already like, holy shit, what the hell? And then this large, awkward 40-year-old guy who is dressed like he raided a thrift store dumpster pops out behind me and asks me what time it is. Okay, I'm thinking. But when I tell him the time, he doesn't even stop a single millisecond and starts asking about me, and is sticking to me like a fly on roadkill. He asks if I go to school around here, and I say yes, what my name is, where I'm from, etc. I don't like being rude. I'm kind of shy, so I gave him one-word answers to his questions, hoping he'd just leave me alone, and thanking the dear Lord I was almost into the grocery store. I tell him I'm from around VA, which causes him to go on some crazed ramble about how I looked like I'm from a foreign country. Like I'm lying to him or something. So after a few minutes of super awkward questions, him introducing himself to me like we were going to be husband and wife for life, and I'm creepily following him, I escape into the grocery store. At this point, I was so overjoyed to be rid of the creepy dude. And then did the typical grocery shopping stuff. Though to my horror, when I exit the grocery store an hour later, he is lurking at the exit. I immediately look at the ground and attempt to avoid eye contact, while madly speeding, walking past him as fast as I can. But to no avail, he starts shouting my name and resumes the 1 foot away from you routine. At this point, I'm like, holy shit, this is weird. And he was totally waiting for me. And this dude is a Superman of creeps. He then continues to pry into my life, asking what I want to do when I graduate. This conversation leads to him realizing that I'm not actually in high school, and then starts pestering me about my age. Like if I didn't already think you were the king of creeps, I definitely do now. Since you were under the preconceived assumption that I was an underage girl and stalking me. With the burst of confidence he gets from knowing Chris Hansen and the police weren't going to bust down the door, he proceeds to try to take my groceries away from me, and tries to get me to come with him after less than 10 minutes of knowing him. I ended up fleeing into a shoe store, after shouting about how my boyfriend was coming to get me. And as the door shuts behind me, I hear him shouting, "I'm sure he's a good man. Let's not meet ever again, dude." The following is a 2-part story set in southwestern Sweden, about a 10-kilometer drive away from Gothenburg. The first part of the story happened to my friend. It was a summer evening, and my friends were just out playing near the roundabout and relaxing. The sun had set for the night, but it's quite bright at night during the summer around this area, so there's usually enough light to continue playing long into the night. The village only has 5 or 600 residents in it. There weren't many cars that passed through. My friend was talking when one of them noticed, in the distance, some strange figures moving about. Telling the rest of his friends right away, the others looked into the distance as well. They saw 4 or 5 completely white humanoid figures darting back and forth across the fields. They would run into view between a couple of garages before dashing out of view on the other side of the garages. It almost just seemed as though they wanted to be noticed. My friends thought it might be someone pulling a strange prank, but the strangest part of all was the complete paperwhite-like look they had and their strange, deliberate run. It almost looked like they ran on their toes, haunched forward, flailing their arms forward in crawling motions. Another strange thing was how they didn't make a single sound while running back and forth. This unnerved my friends, who began shouting questions about what the thing was. The reason I believe my friends in this theory is the look on my friend's face. We'll call him Joe. He looked quite unnerved, and I had never seen him look so serious up to that point. What we saw clearly bothered him, and the next story happened some years later, in our early teens. This one I was present for. My friends and I were hanging outside a large abandoned home, smoking a joint in private and chilling. Across the other side of the street was this new cemetery, since the old one by the church was now full. We're about 200 to 300 meters in a road on a chill, late autumn night when we notice a car come by. This is strange, as we don't get many cars around here, and even less this late at night. We figured it'd be a drive-by, but instead of doing this, it turns into the new cemetery. It isn't long before the car turns and vanishes from our sight. We didn't think much of this, as the elevation and the bushes prevent us from seeing the parking lot past this point. The night goes on, and we stop at the cemetery entrance, still chatting a bit when it dawns on us the car hasn't come out again. Yet this wouldn't be too strange, as it's been about 25 minutes since it went in, but we see no movement around the groundskeeping area either. Which, if this car had gone where we thought, we would have seen someone lurking about, or some sign of life. Curiosity gets the better of us as time goes by, and after much speculation about what happened to the car and its driver, we decided to solve the mystery ourselves. Heading to the parking lot area, where the car should still be, we find nothing. There isn't a car in sight, and they would have been parked here. Freaking out a little bit, we decide to investigate further. We didn't find a car, but we did find a road, surrounded by some trees, heading into a farmer's field. We thought that's had to be where the car went, and it'd be the only other way they could have gone. We looked for a bit longer before giving up our search on this mysterious ghost car. The path was ridden with thick brush, and it didn't seem likely the car would have gone this way, or had an easy time of it. Looking back, it's definitely possible that the guy or gal driving took this unlit path instead of the road like a sane person would have done. That said, if you're going to go through the path, the dirt road eventually leads to another field, which then hits another road that goes into town. The other thing about that, though, is that if you're going to drive a car down that way in the middle of the night, you're going to eventually come to a precipice before hitting the road into town. So you're basically going to have to crash your car to get to that road. We aren't sure where the driver went, but it's highly unlikely they went this route, which begs the question, where did they go?
So a bit of backstory. My school is in a pretty good area, and it's close to a lot of new stores and housing. So it was the kind of area where moms took their kids after school, and the elderly came to chill during the daytime. Naturally, the teachers and staff were a reflection of the people in the area. Sure, there were the usual complaints about students, but there was also nothing out of the ordinary about anyone here. Except for John. John was this typical creepy and rude custodian, who many other students had stories about. I never really paid much attention to these stories since they weren't coming from anyone I really talked to. But based on what I heard, if you were to see John and his partner or friend Linda, you'd get some serious creeper vibes off of them. Since I had a plan for events, I was working late at school one day when I accidentally got locked out of the student council room. No biggie, I suppose. I'd just have to find a custodian to unlock it for me. I walked to the nearest one, an overweight, mid-50s man, and asked him for help. Being fairly social, I made a small talk on the way to our room. I asked him about his plans for his weekend, and he replied with nothing, and asked me in turn. I told him I would volunteer for the annual school carnival tomorrow, and his expression immediately went from friendly to menacing. "Oh, is that so?" he asked, unlocking the door. He said nothing else and began to stare at me. I thought this was kind of weird, but nothing I hadn't ever seen before. Living in a bad neighborhood and everything. The next day, I had completely forgotten about my encounter. Me being the person I was, had decided to bring a designer sweater to the carnival. Of course, I soon learned that a carnival full of children was no place for anything fancy. Walking up into the empty school, I headed towards my locker upstairs. "Hey, you!" someone yelled, expecting to be the only principal or vice principal whom I knew fairly well. I laughed and turned to greet them, before seeing the custodian from yesterday rushing towards me in a tackling stance. He was running at me faster than a bargain hunter at a Black Friday sale, and I immediately booked it up the stairs. We had a fairly long staircase, and he was thankfully out of breath from running this far, so he didn't follow me. "You can't be here," he yelled. "Get out." Normally, I'm not much of a rebel, and like to follow the school rules, but when someone's screaming at me and chasing you, you don't really stop to think about that. I ran up the rest of the stairs and down the hallway to my locker. That must have been John, the weird new janitor, I thought to myself. A week later, I had forgotten about John. I put it off as him just taking his job patrolling the school a bit too seriously. It was club day at our school, which my friend Mina and I were in charge of. We were bringing tables from our cafeteria to the forum for an event, when John came up to us and told us to be sure to clean up afterwards. Now that would have been normal, except he then started telling us all this stuff about what would happen if we didn't, and how every day the custodians had to pick up after the students. You get the idea. After 5 minutes, he kept talking, and we only had a half an hour or so left to set up. So I made some joke about how we'd clean up and try not to burn the house down, hoping he would go away and just let us finish. That didn't go well with John. He started yelling at us about random shit, about how teenagers these days had an attitude problem, and asked me if I was on drugs. I thought he was kidding because in my mind, no reasonable adult would seriously ask that to a 16-year-old. And being the joker that I am, I said something along the lines of, "Well, I just finished some Skittles, so yes, if you considered tasting the rainbow a drug." John apparently had no sense of humor, and had not tasted the rainbow before. When I say yelling, I'm not exaggerating. This guy was yodeling at the top of his lungs incredibly, while adding some bits which my friend and I could not understand. Despite being in English, I had realized that maybe John wasn't at all sane, and that all those stories that were told had been true for some reason. Finally, after finishing, he told us he'd keep an eye on us, and left. You'd have thought that by now. Someone would have come from all the commotion, but then I remembered that the cafeteria was soundproof. Of all the places we had to meet John in, this was already my third time interacting with him over a span of 7 days, and I began to think that maybe it wasn't such a coincidence that he had happened to find Mina and I while we were alone. I told her how weird that John was, and jokingly told her how I'd have to post this to Facebook and give a bad review to the cleaning service. Just like one of the typical soccer moms I friended who I always saw ranting about that kind of stuff. Of course, we both knew I was kidding, as I'm one of those people who never use social media, but most people who didn't know me wouldn't have known that. I grinned, expecting a laugh from my friend, but her eyes were just wide, and her mouth was open, and that was just a moment I was like, he's behind me, isn't he? As it turns out, John didn't leave after all, and he had only went out for like a minute or so, before coming back in to silently lurk near us. John was fuming. He ran to us and started waving the mop around in an attempt to mimic a Jedi with a lightsaber on cocaine, yelling, "You can't post that on Facebook! What's your name?" We took a step back, and I tried not to laugh, but it wasn't every day I saw an insane guy running around like a stick-wielding maniac. I'm pretty sure it's illegal for school staff to add children on social media, I told him. And I didn't even use Facebook. Stop making him mad, Mina whispered to me. John took another few steps forward, and we booked it to the forum with him glaring us from the cafeteria windows like a clinched movie villain. After this, we debated whether we should continue setting up or not. Any normal person would have ditched this idea, but we were running out of time, and we had to finish before lunch started. We would have just tried and ignored him. After all, what was the worst they could do besides yell at us? We walked back to the cafeteria where John, who has now brought Linda, was waiting for us. We tried to avoid eye contact, and John sat down to watch us, while Linda circled us like a vulture. You two have been causing trouble, she said with a smug look on her face. I was starting to regret my decision to continue. Despite the cafeteria being made of particulate glass, it was class time, and there was no one around to see or hear us scream. They wouldn't actually do anything, right? I thought about running away, but John and Linda were close enough to stop us with a tackle or a grab. I started coming up with an attack plan for a worst-case scenario. Worst case? Mina and I get hurt in the school cafeteria in broad daylight. And the tables weren't even ready. Not an ideal result. Linda stepped up to me. I'm going to report you to the office, she said. Oh wow, getting reported sounded much better than being hurt, or worse, with a mop, which John was still holding upside down all Jedi-like. Someone should seriously break it to him that he wasn't Luke Skywalker. But I felt like it wouldn't be a good time to mention that to him. Sounds good, I said. Let's go right now. Linda looked surprised for a second, but regained her menacing glare. If you don't stop sassing me, I'll report you, she yelled. Yep, let's go right now and you can report me, I said. The two of us backing out towards the door. Shut up or I'll report you, Linda screamed. Suddenly the bell rang. We had gotten enough distance between us. Mina and I finally used some sense and ran out. Talk about being saved by the bell. We took a minute contemplating what had just happened to us, then remembered the tables. John and Linda had disappeared once students had started filing out of their classes, and we typically threw the last few tables out on the forum. We considered telling our parents or teachers about this, but what were they going to say? That a couple of our janitors yelled at us because I couldn't keep my mouth shut? Aside from that, they had done nothing illegal, so there was nothing anyone could do anyways. Another week or so had passed. I was walking to one of my classes when I noticed John a few feet away. He was staring straight at me without blinking. I took it off as it being a coincidence, until everywhere I went, I noticed that John was always in the background. I told my friends that I thought John was stalking me, and they all insisted that I tell the principal. I've initially shrugged it off, as I've had other people follow me around in my neighborhood. But then I realized that he might be following Mina too, or maybe some other girls as well. I asked Mina what we should do, and she was freaking out. Like I had figured, John was stalking her too. Finally, the next day, we told everything to my mom and the principal, who had already guessed which custodian I was referring to. After that, I never saw him or Linda ever again. Whether they were fired or decided to suddenly leave, I'm glad that they're no longer at my school, and sincerely hope that they're not stalking anyone else. I guess that's what happens when you don't taste the rainbow.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.